The mop water had gone gray long before the laughter did. It sloshed across a glossy mat under fluorescent lights, picking up the day's sweat, the chalk, and the pride. Near the center of the gym, a man with a black belt performed for an audience that didn't know it was a jury. He called out to the janitor, dark-skinned, middle-aged, in a faded hoodie, inviting him onto the mat like a halftime show. It was framed as a joke, a quick lesson, a bit of gym culture, the kind of thing that looks harmless until you see who is expected to laugh. Phones rose. Smirks tightened. The janitor set the mop aside and stood very still, the kind of stillness that comes from a long life of swallowing noise. Something old and buried woke up in that silence. His name was James Washington, and if you saw him on a bus, you'd forget him by the next stop. He was the kind of man who made cities run, early to work, late to rest, always moving through doors he didn't own with keys he didn't pick. At 42, life had humbled him into a routine that didn't ask questions. He clocked in when the floor was empty, and clocked out when the floor was shining, and the building thanked him with a beep from the time card machine. He wore quiet like a jacket. 3 weeks into a new job cleaning a martial arts academy on the edge of Denver, James had a map in his head, where to find the stubborn scuffs, which drains clogged first, and which instructors left a trail of tape and ego. The black belt instructor, Derek, wasn't the worst of them, just the most performative. He ran his classes like a confidence seminar, worshipped hierarchy, and loved a crowd. He had perfected the art of being inspiring to those who already fit the mold. Fast-twitch athletes with student loans, and parents buying protein powder in bulk. For the students, the gym felt like church, rules, rituals, and a promise that if you rose through the ranks, the world would recalibrate around your discipline. For James, it was a job. He had cleaned hospitals, stadiums, and a courthouse where portraits of judges watched him push a cart. A gym was easy. Still, it scraped at him in ways he refused to name. The logos on the walls, the smiling posters declaring respect, while eyes drifted over him like he was a smudge on a mirror. He had learned long ago that people hear humility as absence. They see a man cleaning and assume he has nothing to teach. Once, many years back, he had lived by a different clock, rounds instead of shifts, fight camps instead of seasons, discipline that wasn't packaged but earned on canvas painted with blood and chalk. Then a night with bright lights and a terrible sound had split his life into before and after. He walked away and learned to live at the edges, working jobs where the only thing that hit back was grime. The night it happened, the advanced class ran long. Anxious to be seen, Derek extended the performance. Students lingered. A young woman, Sarah, stretched in the corner, something watchful in her face. When Derek invited James for fun, the room shifted, familiar as an old bruise. It was the easy assumption of who could be mocked and who could not, who was safe to turn into a lesson. The word fun did the neat trick it always does. It moved responsibility out of the frame. James inhaled. The smell of mat cleaner and rubber shoes flooded him with memories he had trained himself to forget. In the unspoken traditions of gyms like this, there is a ranking deeper than belts. There's the quiet knowledge of who belongs and who has to prove it twice, who is allowed to fail and who must leave no trace. James felt that order like a pressure system as he stepped near the mat. Not a participant, not a member, but a function. The mop bucket swayed behind him like a witness. Derek had a habit of building little spectacles to consolidate authority. He gave jocular speeches about humility and toughness that always seemed to end with someone smaller absorbing the lesson. He didn't use slurs. He didn't need to. His authority was wrapped in credentials and plaques and a black belt tied in a knot of certainty. Many of his students had never seen overt racism up close, and so they mistook its updated form for confidence. James didn't want a scene. He wanted the floor clean and the night over. But the room had locked into a particular kind of theater. When a black man is summoned into spectacle, there is often no dignified way out, only narrower or wider paths through it. He could walk, or he could stand. He chose to stand. It was the microaggressions that did the heavy lifting, the way Derek's voice brightened when he said janitor, how the laughter came with that edge of complicity, and the way some students looked away quickly as if ducking a punch they weren't meant to take. In a country that treats race like weather, constant background, blamed on the sky, these small storms do the daily damage. Sarah noticed everything. In another life, she would become a sports psychologist. In this one, she took notes in her head about posture, breath, and power dynamics. She wasn't new to discrimination in athletics. She had logged hours cataloging how culture can become a moat around a room, who gets invited onto the mat and who cleans it. She watched James for signs, the angle of his shoulders, the care with which he placed his weight. Something in her said, "That man knows more than he will admit." The demonstration began where they always do, with rules arranged to look fair. Light touch, educational, for the beginners. Phrases that hold a door open while keeping their hand on the knob. Derek's students formed a semicircle, the better to witness the ritual humiliation their teacher believed would illustrate a principle. James moved without hurry. He didn't posture. He didn't glare. He simply allowed his body to remember alignment. It started in his feet, pressure evenly distributed, toes alive to friction, and crept up through his calves and hips. That silent re-entry of balance that athletes never lose entirely. Every motion whispered, center first, then everything else. Racism teaches a man two contradictory skills: how to make himself small enough to be ignored and how to expand in an instant when danger demands it. James had practiced both. He had juggled workplaces where jokes were daggers wrapped in bubble wrap, where his professional survival depended on letting insults pass through him like smoke. Tonight, the smoke condensed. Derek closed the distance with a flourish, as if the cameras were already editing. He offered a feint, a playful tap, the choreographed dominance of a man secure in his domain. He had fought. He had won. He had built an identity out of being the person others watched. But experience can be a glass house. You live inside your victory so long that you forget how easily glass fractures. James read him the way he used to read opponents in loud rooms. The shoulder twitch before the jab. The weight transfer that announces a kick a half-second early, and the telltale breath of a man trying to perform calmly while his nervous system knocks. He didn't plan to strike. He planned to survive this with dignity and send a message that didn't require words. He allowed the first move to pass like a bus he never intended to board. A quick slip, a shift of the ribcage out of range. The students didn't quite understand what they had seen. They only noticed that nothing had landed and James hadn't moved much at all. He exhaled through his nose, a soft reminder to himself to stay in the present and not in Vegas under floodlights and a siren memory. The second combination arrived dressed in confidence. Jab cross hook, the holy trinity of intimidation. James let it trace the outline of a ghost he wasn't inhabiting. The hook cut air. Balance tilted. Derek's smile tightened. Somewhere in the semicircle, nerves passed between two students like a current. Sarah could see it now. James's economy of motion, the way he subtracted rather than added. This wasn't luck. This was literacy. He read the room's cruelty and translated it into distance and timing. She felt anger rise, not theatrical, not performative, but the clean anger reserved for witnessing a familiar script being forced on someone who didn't audition. What makes racism so durable isn't only malice, it's design. In that room, power had been engineered. Who held the whistle, who wore the belt, who was introduced and who was unnamed. When the man with the belt picked up the word janitor and swung it like a toy, he understood the design even if he wouldn't call it by its name. James had vowed never to fight again. Not after the accident, not after the friend whose laugh he could still hear went down and never rose. The word accident doing too much work to absolve a night of pressure and taunts that pushed two young men to prove they were worthy of being in a ring that wanted their bodies more than their futures. He left it all, the lights, the hunger, and the noise. He learned the dignity of maintenance, the nobility of ordinary labor, and the way a man can rebuild what the world loves to break. But there is a line between pacifism and surrender. Tonight the line glowed. Derek's third rush arrived with impatience. He amplified force and lost respect for distance. James stepped into the blind spot that opens when a man tries to dominate instead of connect. He placed a palm on Derek's chest, not a strike, an essay, delivering leverage through timing, hips aligned to the ground, and energy routed along a path he learned a lifetime ago. The body knows how to tell the truth even when the mouth refuses. Derek moved backward faster than pride can calculate. Air replaced certainty. His feet left the mat before his mind did. He fell hard and stared at the ceiling, where rules had been written by his own marker. The room held its breath like it had been cued. There is a kind of silence that is heavier than sound. In it sat recognition, about power, about fairness, about how quickly theater evaporates in the presence of reality. Students saw their teacher as a man, not an emblem. Some felt betrayed by the script. Others felt the dizzy relief of seeing arrogance punctured cleanly. James didn't gloat. He didn't speak. He extended a hand, not to pull Derek back to dominance, but back to humanity. In that small gesture lived all the lessons the gym claimed to teach: respect, humility, and responsibility. The hand hovered, patient as a second chance. The phones that had risen to capture a spectacle found a different ending than they expected. Sarah kept hers down. She didn't want a clip. She wanted a reckoning. In the days that followed, the video someone else had recorded traveled faster than context. Strangers captioned it with simple morals. Don't judge a book by its cover, respect janitors, black belts aren't everything, because the internet prefers neat boxes. But inside the gym, the conversation refused simplicity. Students asked why the demonstration was invited in the first place. They asked how respect can become a custom. They asked, some for the first time, whether their space was safe in the ways the posters promised. For Derek, shame arrived not as a mob, but as a mirror. He had constructed a persona sturdy enough to deflect criticism, and now he had to inventory the scaffolding. The easiest move would be denial. Call the moment a fluke, reframe it as a prank gone wrong, and bury it under new content. But something about the fall had jarred loose a truth he couldn't tuck away: the gap between what he taught and how he treated people who couldn't advance his brand. For James, the aftermath felt familiar: attention he didn't want, speculation he didn't owe, and offers from people who loved the story more than the man. He kept showing up. He still pushed the cart. He still wore the faded hoodie. But the way people moved around him had changed. Hierarchy doesn't dissolve so much as it rearranges itself when challenged. He wasn't a janitor to them anymore. He was a lesson. He found that alienating in a different way. Racism is elastic. When challenged in one form, it stretches into another. Yesterday's easy condescension returns as exaggerated praise, both of which center the feelings of those who did the harm. James recognized the pattern and chose a smaller path: hold the door open for genuine conversation, and decline the theater of redemption arcs written by others. The owner of the gym called a meeting. There was a statement drafted and polished into the kind of apology that believes careful wording can erase structural habits. The room filled with students, instructors, a few parents, and the usual white noise of a community trying to decide if it will be brave or comfortable. James stood at the back. He had no desire to be a prop for institutional self-forgiveness. But Sarah, voice steady, asked to speak before the owner read the statement. She described what she had seen, not just a fall on a mat, but a ritual of humiliation presented as pedagogy. She named the architecture, the casual use of a man's job as a punchline, the expectation that a black worker's boundaries are porous, and the easy confidence of a leader performing at someone else's expense. She asked the question institutions hate. Who is the gym for, really? Her words didn't accuse individuals so much as expose a pattern. People shifted in their chairs. Some nodded, relieved that the fog had been translated into language. Others stiffened, holding tight to the narrative that discomfort equals attack. Then the owner turned to James. He asked, with that ceremonial tone reserved for civic moments, if James wanted to share his story. On the surface, it was an invitation. Underneath, it was a request to make the room feel better by narrating pain. James resisted the familiar pull to be legible on demand. He spoke anyway, but not about championships or Vegas or grief. He spoke about mornings, about clocks and keys and the private dignity of doing work most people don't notice. He spoke about how many rooms he has cleaned where the word respect is painted on a wall and yet refuses to land on certain people. He told them that he didn't push Derek. He reminded gravity of its work. He explained that responsibility means never letting power turn into entertainment. Then he did the hardest thing. He handed the moment back to Derek, not with a flourish, but with a simple truth: apology is choreography without accountability. The room pivoted to the man whose belt had been louder than his listening. Humiliation changes flavor when you look it in the face. Derek stood in a silence that was no longer a stage cue. The words he wanted to say, about intentions, about meaning well, died in his mouth. He told the room that he had confused respect for martial arts with respect for people. He admitted that being good at teaching arm bars had made him lazy about teaching humanity. He didn't ask for forgiveness, because forgiveness, when demanded, is only another performance. The moment after he finished was the longest in the gym's short history. It was thick with all the things a community has to decide, whether culture means anything beyond slogans, whether leadership can change without punishment as spectacle, and whether the space would become broader or just quieter. And then the decision shifted, subtle, not cinematic. Students approached James without selfies or hashtags. They asked how to help clean after class. They started to note who was missing from the mat and why. They built a small practice of checking themselves when laughter ran ahead of empathy. It wasn't glorious. It was granular. It was, in a word, work. 3 months later, the gym looked the same and felt different. The same heavy bags, the same posters curled at the edges, the same sound of gloves scuffing leather. But small things had moved. The schedule made space for community self-defense classes priced like groceries instead of like privilege. The lobby bulletin board replaced before and after photos with resources about harassment reporting and worker protections. The family tone, once a shield for looking away, was retrained into something with a spine. James accepted a part-time role leading a weekly seminar on fundamentals and philosophy. Not because he missed the ring, but because he missed honesty. He didn't teach secret techniques or sell miracle mindsets. He taught posture. He taught breath. He taught that strength is graceful when it's grounded in responsibility. His seminar began with a rule everyone could practice without sparring. No jokes about anyone's job. The class learned to hear the way humor can become a trapdoor into contempt. Derek stayed. He left the grand entrances alone and learned how to enter rooms like a person. He apologized again, but this time in the currency that matters, hours invested in being different. He asked other instructors to review his lesson plans for power imbalances disguised as tradition. He stopped using hierarchy as shorthand for wisdom. He faltered because change does, but kept going, because that's the contract he made with the room. Sarah kept taking notes, less about biomechanics now and more about culture. She started a series of community talks called What We Mean by Respect, inviting local coaches, parents, and workers who keep gyms alive. She learned that retention in a training space isn't just about drills. It's about whether people feel safe enough to stay long enough to improve. The Academy's membership shifted, not in dramatic numbers, but in texture. New faces arrived who once would have read the room and decided it wasn't for them. Not every comment online was kind. The video continued to live its own life, cropped and captioned by strangers. Some called James a legend. Some said the fall was fake. He refused interviews unless the outlet would discuss labor, race, and dignity with specificity. Most declined. He was fine with that. He had a floor to mop and a class to lead. The old vow, to never step onto a mat again, didn't so much break as it matured. He hadn't returned to fighting. He had returned to teaching, which is a different kind of courage. The gym did not become a utopia. It became a place where harm was harder to hide. That is not a miracle. It is the result of people choosing to pay attention. Here is what lingers. A hand extended to the person you could have humiliated. A palm placed on a chest in perfect timing. A man refusing to be reduced to a job title so that others can feel tall. The story many want to tell is simple. Never underestimate the janitor. But that tidy lesson risks another erasure. The way racism sets the scene so that underestimate feels natural and respect feels earned only after a spectacle. What happened on that mat is not only about fighting, it is about design. Who holds the microphone? Who gets to define fun? Who is asked to turn their pain into a teachable moment? Ask any black worker in a shiny building, and they can point to 100 small stages where they were invited to perform humility for an audience that never had to learn it. So the question is not whether a black belt can be humbled by a black janitor. The question is whether the room changes without the viral clip. Whether leaders choose accountability before a fall rather than after. Whether respect is a word on a wall or a practice woven through decisions that cost something. If you run a gym, a classroom, or a team, take inventory. Where does hierarchy replace listening? Where do jokes punch down? Whose labor is invisible until something goes wrong? If you train, ask yourself what you are rehearsing besides technique. Are you rehearsing care? Are you rehearsing the courage to interrupt harm before it earns a hashtag? And if this story unsettled you, let it. Discomfort is not a verdict. It's a beginning. Talk to the people who clean your spaces. Pay attention to how your compliments travel. Build rooms where an invitation to have some fun can never be mistaken for permission to degrade. If you want more stories that sit with the hard parts, where dignity isn't a twist ending but the point, stay, listen, share this with someone who thinks respect is a belt you tie, not a way you move. Then ask, in the quiet afterward, what would change here, tomorrow, if everyone mattered before the cameras were on?